So as a culture, we've kind of created fear-filled, anxiety-addicted individuals who really have created a padded cell for themselves. That's what their life is a padded cell of, I'm just going to do exactly what I have to do so that I'm okay. And I'm too scared to step out of that. That's one way you can tell really quickly. I am absolutely controlled by fear. And like Damian said, that means that you have to continually hand over personal responsibility to something or someone else.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Spearcast. Today I am joined by Bethany and Kathy. Today's topic is responsibility. And I'm getting rather fond of coming up with these topics that are just these really giant concepts and just throwing it out there like, hey, what is responsibility, everyone? Go. So I'm really enjoying that, and I hope y'all are enjoying that too. But anyway, we're going to kind of cover... we're going to talk a little bit amongst ourselves about some of the revelation we've had recently, conversations we've had, and prayer time we've had about what God thinks about responsibility. I'm sure that there are plenty of ideas out there. Plenty of pastors have spoken on this in the past. If you Google what does the Bible say about responsibility, it'll throw at you 538 verses, all of varying flavors and shapes. So it's not that this topic hasn't been covered. But when you look at the world around you, even in Christian circles, maybe even especially in Christian circles, you don't see effective responsibility. You don't see people being personally responsible for themselves. It's good morning, everybody. How is everybody doing today?
Well, I feel it's my responsibility to tell you I'm doing pretty well this morning.
And it begins.
Now I don't know how to follow that up. That was too good. Now I feel like I'm doing great. Yeah.
Pretty sure you have a responsibility to follow it up.
I know. Unfortunately, I'm not as witty. I'm doing well. Doing good. I woke up. I'm not quite done with my coffee yet, but we're getting there.
Yeah. It's actually been a big week for everybody here. I know that Kathy had a meeting with some of her students and parents of students in her business. If anyone listening doesn't know, Kathy runs her own business as a private tutor, homeschool assistant, a discipleship kind of thing where she takes children of all various flavors and forms and adults even and teaches them in a way that oftentimes public schools don't do. And so anyone who doesn't fit in the system is in good hands with Kathy. But I know you had a good meeting this weekend talking about a new course, a new plan. So I hope that went well for you.
You have another one coming up, don't you?
Yes, there's another parent meeting on Thursday on Zoom. And so we've got a couple signed up. Not a big crowd yet, but it's good, and sometimes realize, okay, I'm supposed to plan this meeting and I have kind of in my mind what we're going to talk about. And then it goes totally differently than you expect, but good things still come out of it. And, it's interesting that even when we take responsibility for things, that it doesn't always quite go the way we expect it to, where our job is just to follow directions and kind of put things in place and then take our hands off the wheel and let things fall where the Lord puts them.
It's an important point because your responsibility was God asked you to have this meeting, and you probably prepared what you were going to talk about. You probably prepared well, but it's His responsibility to control the outcome. It's His responsibility to bring the right people, to impress upon their heart, and then each individual person has their own responsibility to receive and process the information. So I'm glad that you're able to do that, and I look forward to seeing how that goes for you in the future. Bethany, on the other hand, had a pretty busy weekend as well. She went up to Wytheville, Virginia, to Big Walker Overlook. Big Walker Lookout. That's what it is. Big Walker Lookout. It's a big old tower where you can see 4 different states from the top of the tower. And they brought in some local musicians to play some bluegrass, and she got to sign and sell books. It was pretty good. So how did that go for you, Bethany?
Pretty good. I think I sold like 15 books and got to sign them all and talk to a lot of fun people. I had one person ask me to sign their arm. That was new. Never been asked to sign somebody's arm.
That's awesome.
But that was fun. Yeah, and I had a couple of people like, "Oh, this book is going to be famous someday." So I was like, "Cool." So that was fun. That was exciting. And yeah, the people at Big Walker Lookout, they were awesome, very hospitable, and gave us food and ice cream, and it was really good. So if you're ever in Virginia, it's a great place to go. Beautiful views of the Smoky Mountains. It's incredible. So definitely check them out. But it was really good, and I'm going back next Saturday, so we'll be enjoying that. I have not climbed the tower yet. I kind of left it up to my fans on social media to see whether or not I'm doing that.
Yes.
Yeah, it seems that so far I've only gotten yeses. So I guess I'm going to be climbing a really
you can
tall.
Vote on Instagram. I think you can vote on TikTok.
Yes.
Yeah, just putting that out there.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting. Yeah, I mean, no one seems overly concerned with whether or not it's safe. They all just want to see me go to the top. So that's probably what I will be doing. I haven't decided if I'm going to take a parachute with me or not, just in case. Maybe a glider. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, I had no idea the first day you posted and, just kind of showed the front of the storefront where you were set up. But the second day when you posted and showed the scenery behind you, like, whoa, that is breathtaking. It's so pretty.
It was really nice, especially yesterday. Like Saturday was really hot, but yesterday was a nice breeze. Storm had come through, cooled everything off. It was, and I love too. Like it's called Smoky Mountains for a reason, and it's got that fog. It really looks like smoke coming off the hills. It's really cool. It's a beautiful spot. So definitely check it out if you get the chance.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you guys both had productive and enjoyable weeks. Anybody who's interested in this stuff, you can find Kathy at upwardhouselearning.com. You can find Bethany at amazon.com. You can find her books there. You can find her on all social medias. Both of them are on social media. You just search either Upward House or BAJ Novels on those social media platforms and you'll find them. So
I have
there you
found
go.
on Amazon, it's easiest to find her and her books if you type in her name, Bethany Jensen.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I just wanted to catch up and plug you guys and thank you for being here. So let's dive right into this topic. The first thing on the list is personal responsibility. I think that it's a good place to start because at the end of the day, if you're not taking care of yourself, you really can't take care of the things outside of you. So let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, we'll just start really broad as usual. What does personal responsibility mean? Like, what do I have to do to take care of myself, to be responsible for me?
I started by, when Damien posed the topic this weekend, I was like, oh, there's those words again. But I had to look it up because the Lord's been talking to me a lot about goal setting and personal responsibility. But in order to talk about it with a group or, to our listeners and with you guys, I felt like I needed to kind of get a grasp on what does the world see personal responsibility as, and give myself some vocabulary in order to be able to verbalize. And it's interesting. It says...
See, that's the teacher for you, everybody.
Yeah. Personal responsibility is when you take full accountability for your actions, decisions, thoughts, and more. I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. Another one said, the willingness to both accept the importance of standards that society establishes for individual behavior and to make strenuous personal effort. And it also means that when individuals fail to meet expected standards, they don't look around for some factor outside themselves to blame. So some of the perspectives that were presented were personal responsibility versus the victim mindset. And I thought those were interesting perspectives. I've been working on taking responsibility, for my thoughts. What have I believed? Kind of working on things within myself, but then also, for instance, with Upward House Learning, setting goals and those kinds of things. But it was interesting to see what Google said for the other sources. And the first one I read, so Brookings.edu has an article by Ron Haskins from 2009. The sequel was tickthoseboxes.com.au. What is personal responsibility? So I can post those somewhere if anybody wants those. But I personally think what we're talking about today might be more pertinent and more easily more easily applicable. I can't talk. I'm trying to use my vocab words. They're not coming out.
Yeah. So I found the second definition interesting. Talk to me a little bit about that. The idea that we're intended to conform to the social accepted practices of society, and culture dictates that.
Yeah, I feel like there was some truth and some error in that. Well, I mean, society does expect us to conform, but that's not always the healthiest. I mean, that's putting, which I think we may get into later, that's putting responsibility on our shoulders that's not actually meant to be on our shoulders if we conform to societal expectations. But
I
not
agree that
ourselves for something to blame. That's an interesting perspective.
Right. I agree that society creates expectations. That's absolutely true. And I believe and I agree that people are expected to follow those expectations. But to put that as a definition of responsibility, I think is completely inaccurate. You're basically saying that if society deems something right, then you are required or morally obligated to do so. And I think that responsibility is more in line with, and if you haven't checked out our last podcast about truth, I think this connects very well, that there is a base truth in the universe. There are base things that exist regardless of what anybody thinks or says. And you have a responsibility to those things. And if society goes against those things, then you essentially have to choose your loyalty and you will be held accountable. And the difficult part is that if you live in a society and you choose to go against that society because you believe they're violating a core truth, you will be held accountable by that society, most likely. And that is the truth. And I feel like I experienced that a lot, to be honest, and not to go too deep into personal story at the moment. But I feel like I experienced that a lot. When I choose God's path, society punishes me. Lack of a better term, that's the most accurate way to put it. If I choose God's path in certain ways, society tends to punish me, and that's life. You have to accept that. So, anyway, definitely went off on a tangent there, but I just found that second definition to be very interesting, that they threw that under the word for responsibility. And having studied languages and things like that, I definitely understand the concept of different cultures and their different beliefs and their different just ways of living life. And some of them, to me, is like, do whatever you do. If your culture teaches you that way, it's probably fine. And then some things are a little more difficult to accept. And so it's interesting. The idea that your culture can determine what is right and wrong, I think, is another step along the path of live your own truth, invent your own reality kind of thing.
I think sometimes too, the reason why a culture does something is totally lost to the past. So you can have a tradition, and that tradition kind of de-evolves into something that it was never meant to be. I feel like there are certain holidays and traditions throughout history that have kind of done that, and you don't really know why it's done anymore. You know, I would say Christmas being one of those, the various times in history when it was like considered a holy holiday versus it was considered a day of debauchery, that goes on and off. Same thing with things like Mardi Gras, like, well, what is it? What was his intent? What was the original purpose? And you see things like that, whether or not you agree with them in the initial or not, I think it is important to evaluate, why do we do what we're doing? Why do I do it? Why do I participate? I think there is a responsibility there to say, why am I doing something? My reason behind doing something is also important. So if I'm just going along with it because everybody else does it, that doesn't necessarily make it right or wrong, right? So, you know, but taking responsibility and saying, okay, am I doing this for the right reason, and is this the right thing to do? You are responsible for that part. I do find it interesting. So there's a verse in Galatians, and it's actually really well known, and it talks about. I'll go ahead and start in verse 19. It's Galatians 5. I'll start in verse 19 just because I want to make the case for there's a difference between what is acceptable in society versus what the expectation for self-responsibility is. But in verse 19, it says, the acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity and debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, self-ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. So that one's kind of like obvious, right? So I would say that I have seen in one way or another, I have seen all of these things be acceptable in our society. Fits of rage, sexual immorality, envy, deceit, like all these things have become acceptable in our society. Okay. Versus when we go to verse 22, but the fruits of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Now, I would agree with the author of Galatians in saying that, yeah, I don't think anybody's out there writing a law saying you can't have self-control, you can't have love, you can't have kindness, you can't have these things. I don't think anybody's around there saying that. Now, cultural interpretation of those words, of those things, might be different, and that's where you have to kind of, you know, make that decision of, okay, is it, I'm responsible for the decisions that I make here. Am I doing things the world's way? Am I doing things God's way? But if those are our expectations, and that's where I find it so interesting, again, going back to kind of this concept of, it seems like there are two different, almost seemingly, what's the word I'm looking for? Seemingly opposite concepts in which you have, this realization that, you know, it says, do good works that your Father in heaven will be praised, glorified. And so you're like, okay, I'm going to do good things. And so if I live by the fruits of the Spirit, then people will recognize and say, you know, and recognize that, or at least they should. But then you also have where God says, woe to you when all men speak well of you. Right. And so I think when you're living a life of responsibility and you're taking decisions and you're saying, I'm going to live the way God says I'm going to live, you're going to encounter things where it may not be culturally acceptable, or it may not be something that your culture accepts. But I think the general premise of being loving, being faithful, being kind, like all these different things, all the different fruits of the Spirit, I really think people have a hard time coming up with a valid case against you, and there is a difference. And I think throughout history you can see there's a difference. Culturally, I don't like you. Culturally, I'm willing to condemn you. But when it comes to the positive qualities that you have, I really don't think there's a single culture on earth that has ever been like, you know what, we don't like peace, we don't like love, that's out, you know, we don't like you because of that specifically. We just don't like the things that you stand for, the things you stand against, because that's that's offensive to us. It's offensive to, and to put it bluntly, to our satanic or Luciferian way of doing things or believing things. So I think there is that difference there. You can still, I think it's very simple to still live within a culture, without necessarily bending to the things that you ought not bend to.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw it, Bethany, but I held up my Bible because I had reached over and grabbed my Bible and opened to that exact same passage when Damien was talking about the contrast in that definition and saying that we need to conform to society. I was like, oh, that's related to this. And I grabbed it, and then you started talking about, like, yeah, great minds think alike. Because what really attracted me to that passage originally was the fruits of the Spirit, and how self-control is listed as one of those fruits. And so I knew it was going to be related in the conversation somewhere, but I wasn't sure where it would come up. But it seems to me that, okay, if these are fruits, one, the beginning part that you read, yes, I agree. Like that's now describing the culture. Idolatry, I think, is one that sneaks in there and it sounds minor, but I think that's where a large portion of our culture, they may not participate in all the other things that seem more extreme, but they aren't letting go of idols. So, the description of culture, and then the description of what should the fruits be. And I think part of our responsibility as we start to examine ourselves and to figure out what we are responsible for, start with that introspective look at, and I was talking with someone about it yesterday, or commenting on a Facebook post, I don't remember for sure which, but that if we don't have those fruits or evidence of those fruits, including self-control, to start to examine, okay, which ones do I not have, at least on a regular basis? I don't know if I'll ever reach a point where I'll be 100% on all of them all the time, showing those fruits, but hopefully the general theme will be that they'll be observable. If I don't have one or two or many of them, to start examining why, and let the Lord take me through. Okay, why is this not a fruit? What needs to be worked on so that fruit can be produced? What fertilizer, what weeding needs to happen so that fruit can be produced?
Right.
I realize I'm kind of, that I'm jumping ahead slightly, or alluding to something that we'll kind of probably dive into a little deeper. But you brought up idolatry and witchcraft, and I think to define those a little more simply is to try and take responsibility or control of something that is not yours to control. Mm-hmm. And so I think that few people realize that how much the topic of responsibility kind of bleeds into some of these issues of, if I'm going to an idol, a lot of times the reason that you're going to an idol is because you need a child, or you need rain for your crop. And in more, let's say, like, more modern times, you need money, or you need entertainment, or you need a job, or you need, whatever. And you start turning to certain idolatry in terms of, I'll do whatever I've got to do or deal with whoever I have to deal with in an effort to get the things that I want. And then I think a more modern, and I realize I'm going to step on a ton of toes, but feel free to comment. I would say more modern witchcraft is, I actually see a lot of it in the Christian community, and that is to declare something and to do whatever prayer, vigil, specific, laid out, pre-prescribed prayer, whatever I have to do to try and get something that I want, and I'm trying to get God to give it to me. And I think few people realize they're really stepping into witchcraft more than they are into requesting something of God in faith, and then waiting on Him to deliver that, or to answer that. So I think those are two things that
are you saying that name it, claim it is not real?
Yeah, pretty much. I have seen
Okay.
people plenty of times have that happen. Okay, where they name it and claim it, and it comes to pass, as it were. But I'm saying that essentially what you're doing is you're trying to, manipulate the powers that be to get something that you want.
Okay, but doesn't God in the Bible say, "Bring your concerns before me, pray to me, ask me for what you need"? Does he not? Doesn't Aren't there examples of people doing things to please God or to gain God's favor? And how is that different than whatever it is you're talking about?
Well, I think there are two major factors. Number one, there is the motivation of manipulation. I've already decided I want it, and I've decided that God wants to give me this good thing. So, for example, one of the biggest examples is I want this house. I've heard this one specifically a lot, and from women. Not saying it's just with women, but specifically from women. And the examples that I'm thinking of is a woman goes to a house or drives by a house for so many years and says, "I want that house," and so they start declaring, "That's my house. That's my house. That's my house. That's my house," and saying, "In God's name, that's going to be my house." And then one day it is. And they're like, "Oh, I'm finally living here." Okay, so um, I don't know if you've ever encountered a manipulative child that nags for something, and they've just decided whether it's good for them or not good for them, and they've not even taken that into consideration. They've decided that it's theirs and they want it, and that's the end of the story. So there's that part of it. The other one being, I'm gonna do everything I can think of, whether it's a specific prayer or go to people and I'll ask them to pray for me to get this thing. I'm just gonna assume that because I want it and it seems like a good thing for me, that God wants that for me, and I'm just gonna jump through whatever hoops I have to jump through to get it. And I think that there's this desire of manipulation. There's a complete disregard for whether or not God wants it for you or it is what is best for you. There's no surrender involved. And there's no, what I would call, waiting upon the Lord.
Do you agree or disagree with the idea that I wouldn't say God orders it, but God encourages you to continue asking for things even if you don't get it right away?
I do. And I would say that here's the difference. I've seen people, and I think that there's a biblical example of this. Right when you're like, "I'm done asking. Like, I've given up. Like, I don't even care if I get it anymore." Like, at this point, I'm just writing off the fumes of God said I will or God said I should. I think David's a good example. I mean, what is it, like 40 years between being anointed and actually becoming king of Israel? I think that same things with Moses, with even Christ himself. So many people were given a promise or told that they were going to do something or told to pursue something, and they did. And having to wait on God to finally come through on that. I mean, Abraham is another fantastic example of that. That you're kind of at the point where, like, I I don't even know. Like, I don't even know what to do anymore, and I'm gonna not give up, but there's nothing I can do. And so a lot of times what ends up happening is you kind of let go of that, and I think it's Frank Viola, his book, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it, Hold Tight, and yes. And so that concept of I'm gonna have faith in it, but I kind of just let it go because it's not my responsibility, it's not my job. I can't make it happen. And that's how I think you can tell pretty easily, is this from God or is this from me?
And, Damien, I'd like to kind of respond to that too, if I could.
Please.
I've seen similar things to what Bethany was saying. I know one person who shared with me that she declared, "That's my car, that's my car, that's my car." And eventually she got the car. "That's my house, that's my house, that's my house." And eventually she got the house. And she says, "See, God gives me what I ask for. He'll give everyone what they ask for. You just have to be confident, declare it." But that same person was also asking for healing, commanding healing in an individual that I was working with. And I saw that she proclaimed, she said, more of your truth, Lord, more of your truth. And all of these things sound good, but I asked the person, what truth? Because she was telling the person to cling to God's truth. But this person was high on drugs. This person was not clear-minded. And I realized God could cause someone to be clear-minded, even if there are chemicals in their body. That could happen. But this individual, I asked her because I knew her state, and I knew after trying to work with her and discipling her that she was choosing a different path. She was not choosing to pursue knowing Christ more deeply. So I said, what truth do you have to proclaim about the Lord right now? And she said, my son's up there in that airplane. And so I think the things people are asking for and proclaiming are possible, but they're trying to manipulate it in their time when they want. And in this case, it was for the woman's glory, not for God's. She wanted to be known as someone who declares healing over people, and it happens. And that's where I was like, okay, this is a part of this ministry that I am responsible for. I am shutting it down because this person was being manipulated and exploited for this other person to try to get glory out of it. And so I said, I'm sorry, this is not going to happen right now. And that was ended and shut down. All of that to say that, and even recently, I've encouraged some of the women that I work with to knock and keep knocking, ask and keep asking, seek and keep seeking. But what they're seeking is for the Lord to work in them, for the Lord to, they want to be able to hear him clearly. They are seeking things that are clearly what the Lord wants for those of us who are seeking and following him. Can healing come out of that? Absolutely. Can freedom come out of that? 100%. But they're seeking his heart. They're asking for things that are clearly part of his heart and not for their own pride, glory, or elevation.
So this is where it gets frustrating, right? Is that I've asked several questions and nobody has said this is the right way and this is the wrong way.
Yeah.
Nobody has said you should only ask God once and then let it go, or you should ask God as many times as you can. Or neither of you have said that. And when you read the Bible, there are examples of both. They really are.
I just a practical way. If you're dealing with somebody, you're like, I don't know what to do with this, because I've known people that have done that, the name it and claim it, like to the point where like it's wildly uncomfortable. You're standing next to somebody who's literally screaming at somebody else that's sick or dealing with mental disease or something, trying to declare something away. If you're uncomfortable,
those ones
you're
are always
unsure,
fun, right?
Right. If you're unsure of what's going on, simply question the person that's doing it. Simply say, what is it that you're trying to get at? What is it that you're trying to do or manifest? And I've noticed something. I've noticed a pattern. Anytime you try to question a person who's doing these things from a selfish perspective, they'll get defensive, they'll get frightened, they'll get angry, they'll get upset with you, because either, or they'll accuse you of not believing, or they'll accuse you of something. So that's a really good indicator. If you start questioning somebody who's trying to tell you, oh, this is how you get something from God, or you say, I'm not really comfortable with that. Can you kind of give me some examples? Can you help me walk through this? A lot of times those people will become defensive as opposed to helpful and will kind of teach you. They'll be very different in a moment, especially if you kind of interrupt them in the middle of I'll just call it what it is, a chant, and you interrupt that. Like Kathy said, like if they're going after it for their own glory, and they don't even have to realize that's what they're doing, they can tell you, oh no, this is for the glory of God, and be completely unaware it's for them. If you interrupt that, they'll respond in a way that you'll be like, oh, okay, this clarifies things for me.
their response shows their fruit.
Yeah.
It shows,
I like that point a lot.
Is it debauchery? Or is it, not debauchery, dissension, fits of rage, selfish ambition. So those fruit versus the peace, joy, long suffering, so depending on how they're reacting, and I've had a lot of people ask me, how do you judge the fruit? Well, you can start discerning world symptoms versus fruit of the Lord.
I just wanted to give that as an example of a way that you can kind of test things and figure things out, because you are responsible for that, for figuring that stuff out. Because I see a lot of people go, oh, that's just scary, that's uncomfortable, and I'm just going to leave it, and I'm not going to try and figure it out and investigate. It's your responsibility when you're confronted or something's brought before you to figure it out. So that's kind of a practical way that you can kind of like, all right, I need to discern what's going on here. Just kind of figure out what the person's motivations are, to kind of help you figure that one out.
Yeah. And you mentioned Frank Viola once already, and one of my favorite quotes of his, and I'm probably not quoting it directly, and he was speaking about politics at the time, so disclaimer there, but he says, if it's making you extremely angry, if you're becoming really angry over something, in his case, he was talking about a political point. In this case, you're talking about being questioned about your methods. If it makes you that angry, it's an idol. And so Frank Viola is essentially saying, if you are that angry about it, it's because it's an idol, and your idol has been challenged, and you are now upset because your idol has been challenged. And you have to be violent, you have to be aggressive in order to defend it, because fear has now been created in you, because you've been challenged, and you're not comfortable, you're not solid and confident enough in that to just hold on to it. You don't see that kind of behavior from any of the men in the Bible. Peter was considered an aggressive man. He cut off a guy's ear. Like, he was an aggressive dude. But, after he grows up a little bit, he has plenty of these interactions, and he is calm, and he is peaceful, and he's willing to be questioned, willing to be insulted, willing to be accused. He sits there and he speaks truth, and he says, oh, you accuse me, you have the right to do so. He stands in front of the religious leaders and says, you do what you have to do, and I'm going to do what I have to do. And I will do what God asks me to do. And that's that. And he doesn't yell and scream and get angry. So many of these men in the Bible are abused. They are enslaved. They are imprisoned. They are jailed. They are abused. They are damaged. And you never see any of them freak out. You never see they are called names. Yeshua himself is called a child of the devil. He's called a blasphemer. I mean, it basically is saying you are the greatest sinner against God. You claim to be his son. Like, you are clearly the most evil person we've ever met. And he says, okay, well, that's a bummer for you. Like, there is a level of calm. And so, yeah, I guess I rambled on a little bit, but I just really like that point, is that if somebody's freaking out on you for asking a question, it's an indicator that they have a bigger problem that you can't deal with.
And more than, this kind of goes with so I was writing down reflections of why I don't trust myself, and one of those is because people often get upset with what I'm doing, or they don't follow me where I'm going. And so when those negative things come, and you've revealed now a negative fruit, and I'm speaking to myself now, instead of taking that as discouragement that I'm doing something wrong, sometimes it may be an indicator that I'm doing something right.
I've dealt with people, especially in dealing with people that are particularly higher educated than me, or considered a professional in the field, and we're engaging in conversation. I have trouble sometimes where I'm like, I really don't think that's right. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I'm concerned about trying to articulate it because I have this feeling that they're smarter than me and they know more than me. And so I can be a little, instead of pushing forward and actually stating what I believe to be true, sometimes I can kind of back down because I'm afraid. And so or I can take it personally, be like, oh, so and so thinks I'm stupid. But I think I've had to learn, actually, through engaging in difficult conversations. I've learned that, wait a minute, who I am and what I believe is based off of things that God has taught me and the things that he's brought me through. So if I'm inaccurate on something, which is totally possible because I only have my perspective to work with, but somebody might bring another perspective at the table. That doesn't necessarily make my perspective wrong. It just means there's another perspective. And so realizing that I can be confident in who I am and who God is, which is supposed to be my foundation. And so the more that he is my foundation, the more that there's less dependency on me personally to be right. And I can turn to him and go, okay, what do you say about this? Or what do you think about this? As opposed to just it all being on me. And so I think that there's a difference there. There's a difference between freaking out, particularly on other people, and becoming a victim and being like, oh, well, you don't like me because I'm a Christian, or you don't like what I have to say because I'm standing for what's right, or I'm standing for truth. You're getting defensive, which doesn't make you wrong or right, but it does make your stance kind of weak. And so you need to find your foundation there. So that's a slightly different perspective that you have to take into consideration. But I think as far as, hey, if I'm feeling kind of hurt or something because someone disagrees with me or because someone's not going the direction I'm going, I think that there's certain natural responses to that. And you and I have talked about it before, where you feel the responsibility, there's that word again, to go on a particular path. God's leading you on a particular path, and you absolutely need to do that. And you think other people are going with you because people are like, yeah, I'm totally with you, I agree with you, and then they don't go. I think being hurt by that, and even feeling a little defeated by that, and having to sit there and question yourself, like, yeah, okay, I thought everybody was on board, now they're not. Am I still going? Do I still think that this is the right thing to do? I think that's a natural response. That's a good response.
So yes, I think what you were saying, I have some thoughts about what you're saying. It's not exactly where I thought I was going with it, but when there's resistance, or you think people are going along your path and then they fall off or whatever, or they don't continue that path with me. Yes, it's definitely caused a reason, or caused me to do some self-examination and go back to the Lord and say, okay, is this really the direction I'm supposed to go? But I've also realized that just because there's resistance, and just because there's pushback, and just because people haven't gone that direction or stuck with me on something, does not necessarily mean I'm wrong. It does not necessarily mean that I've chosen something I shouldn't. I've started to realize that sometimes that can exhibit their fruit, or where that person is. It is important to do that self-reflection piece. Okay, am I really doing something that's the most efficient use of my time? Is this really my responsibility, or am I just taking it on myself for other reasons? Those kind of things. So yeah, thank you for your thoughts, because it kind of helped me clarify it. Because I started to say that when there's pushback, then that is positive reinforcement. I'm going the right direction, and that's not necessarily always true either. So
right. So, I mean, a lot of what we've been talking about already is basically there's a level of responsibility that you have for yourself, for your understanding, for your discernment of what is true. At the end of the day, you have to decide. I mean, at the very, very basic of this, the very basic Christian standpoint, you have to decide if you choose God, Yeshua, as your Savior or not. Like that is a choice you have to make. And that choice comes with consequences, and it comes with commitments. It comes with results, as it were. And so I think we underplay that. I think the Christian culture underplays that responsibility. You have to determine. And yes, Yeshua will reach out. He will help you. He will guide you to truth. He will help you figure it out. But at the end of the day, you have to determine what is true. You have to determine it and choose it. And that is a hefty responsibility. And I think we've started almost at the top here and said, your responsibility is great and challenging. And I think that the unfortunate truth is that people are going to have a hard time getting to that choice, that responsibility, because many people struggle with the basics. And so what do I mean when I say the basics? I mean everything as simple as I have to feed myself. I am responsible to eat. There are people out there, and I've been in this situation before, where you get up, you're tired, you're trying to get up, you're trying to head to work or something, and you just don't have the motivation, the self-discipline to make yourself a good breakfast. And sometimes you'll just grab something like a Pop-Tart, or sometimes you just won't eat. I've been in this situation many times where I just don't eat. Much less lately, but in the old days, I'd get up at 4 a.m. and I would skip breakfast because I didn't want to get up any earlier. I didn't want to put the effort in. I was tired. It was dark. And I would even be too lazy to get lunch. And so then my choice is that when it comes to lunchtime, I still don't eat, or I have to drive to a McDonald's and have something that's probably worse than not eating, and then I come home for dinner and gorge myself because I'm starving. So that to me, like, I think we need to realize that is a lack of self-respect. That is a lack of self-discipline, and it is a complete dereliction of responsibility. So we've talked about the really high responsibility of finding truth, listening to God and finding God's truth. But I think people are struggling to even get there because we're struggling with personal responsibility. So I don't have a specific question, but somebody talk about that for a second.
I'd like to kind of go back and when Kathy was kind of reading off the different definitions and explanations of responsibility. One of the things that I think what the opposite of is, okay, this is my take on it. All right. One of the things that I think is the opposite of personal responsibility is victimhood or slavery. I'm going to put those both kind of in the same category. And the reason being that as a slave, you have way less responsibility than somebody who's free, right? You basically dependent on someone else for everything. But also victimhood. Victimhood really basically tells you are not worthy of taking care of. In fact, you are worthy of disdain and punishment and pain and hurt and all these different things. And so you are not worthy of being taken care of. And so there's no reason for you to take responsibility because you're not worth it. And a lot of times victimhood will put on you, and the idea of victimhood of being that I don't have any responsibility because someone is hurting me, and taking that responsibility. And that's why victimhood is essentially, and I'm not going to say that it's blanket statement, it's a choice. Okay, there are some people that are truly honestly being victimized, and they don't have a lot of choice, and they don't have a lot of say in that. And I would say that that's kind of the worst place to be. That if you are in a situation where you are being victimized or being abused repeatedly, that you have a responsibility to yourself to, and I'm going to say it, stand up for yourself and do something, whether that's getting out of the situation or fighting back or standing your ground, whatever it is, and saying, regardless of what you do to me, I am still going to stay firm in who God says I am. And that is not an easy thing. If where you're starting out is I've been abused, I'm a victim, I've been hurt, I'm not worth taking care of. If that's where you're starting out, that is such a difficult place to come out of. However, I will say I'm a personal example of you can come out of it. Now, I'm not going to say I'm perfect at it because I'm not. In fact, I still struggle with some of the basic things like, hey, I need to get up and, take care of myself. There are times where like doing something simple like getting up and going to the bathroom is just like, that's not important at this moment. And I just don't, and I don't, and I don't until, I really got to go. And that's just, it's unnecessary. But taking responsibility for who you are and who you want to be and how you treat yourself and having self-respect. A lot of times people are coming from this victimization or I don't have a say, or this slavery, which is somebody else has to tell me what to do. Somebody else has to tell me how to take care of myself. Somebody else has to tell me what my priorities are, or I'm just lost and I don't know what to do. So those are kind of our baseline why I think a lot of people just don't do it. And the idea of taking responsibility, that word responsibility may very well just be a trigger word for them because they're constantly being told, be responsible. And they're going, for what? How? I don't even know. Like, I know I'm a bad person and I'm not being responsible, but I don't know how to change that. And a lot of it stems from victimhood and just a slavery mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think, and any either of you can answer this question, but do you think that there's a lack of understanding that this personal responsibility is kind of step one, and so people are moving on to try and address bigger responsibilities without solving these first ones?
Yeah, I think that's huge. Like we even see whether it's someone, okay, I know these are extreme examples, but just it's easier to see in an extreme example and then kind of simplify it down to where we might be. If you see someone escape from, they've been set free from an abusive relationship, or they've been set free from human trafficking, it's difficult for some people to imagine the difficulty that a person has when they've come out of those extremely abusive, extremely controlling environments where they've basically been beaten down for making any choices whatsoever. It's very unpredictable how someone's going to react because the oppressor, the abuser, changes just to keep that person under the control. Any choice that person makes, they're beat down for it. If they stand up for themselves, or if they speak up, if they start managing something, if they take care of another person who's also in that abusive situation, they're taught that any action whatsoever will be punished. Right. So when they get set quote unquote free, they're now in a different environment, but they still don't have the skill set to be able to make choices for the most basic needs, because that was totally controlled before. Now, if we look at, and it's interesting that if you look at the headings, if your Bible has the little subtopical headings over the sections of scripture, the right before the fruits of the Spirit section is a section labeled freedom in Christ. Well, clearly, most of us don't know how to operate in freedom. We have to be taught how to operate in freedom and how to recognize oppression and fruits of oppression versus fruits of freedom. And so this isn't just a concept that survivors of trafficking or survivors of extreme abuse or even codependent manipulation in the home or any of kind of our textbook labeled definitions. This is society as a whole, people as a whole. We do not know how to operate in freedom. So I think often we jump to the big things without realizing there are these little core pieces underneath that need the nurturing. They need the weeding done to pull out what are the lies, what are What are the lies I've been taught my whole life to condition me to think I don't have choices, to condition me to think I can't take care of these things?
Yeah. Something that you were saying, you didn't say the word, but everything that you said, I think, points around to this. And tell me if you disagree, but it sounds like fear is what is the driving factor in all of these things. And
yeah, that's the
when
control.
you take,
That's the tool for control.
yeah, when you take like you said, an extreme case of human trafficking or human victimization, it's kind of easy for people to see that. I think if you were privy to it, you would say, okay, this person is taught that speaking up in any way is punishable. And oftentimes you'll see that even when they think they've got the right answer, they've learned what the person expects. The person will change their expectations just to keep that fear rolling. And it's about, because at the end of the day, it's not about you getting it right. It's about you pleasing them wherever they're at. And you see this with victimizers. You also see this with parents. You see a lot of kids don't know how to deal with their own parents because the expectations of the parent changes based on the parent's mood. If I'm in a good mood and you come to me and you say, Dad, I would like, can I have a snack? You might get, oh, what have you had today? Well, I haven't had any snacks. Well, go ahead and grab yourself a snack then. But if I'm stressed out and I'm having a rough day and you come to me and it's the same situation, but you say, Dad, may I have a snack? Dad might respond, what? Seriously, can't you tell that I'm busy? I'm working here. I don't have time for you and your snacks, and you kids are just so selfish and eating snacks all the time, and like you just explode on the child for asking the same question. You have not taught that child whether or not to respect your time. You have not taught that child whether or not having a snack is appropriate. You have not taught them, because I think boundaries are okay. I think it's fine for a child to eventually learn, I don't bother Dad during this time because of X reason. Like, for example, we don't have our studio, we record in our own home, and I have expectations for the kids not to bother me during these recordings. I think that's okay. But in this circumstance, in this example, that person has not taught the child a boundary. They have not taught the child responsibility. They've not taught the child how to think for themselves. They've taught the child, I made Dad mad. And that, I don't even know why or how. And their only response can be, bothering Dad at any point is dangerous. And so they have to calculate and weigh whether or not what they're about to do is worth the potential danger. And their life becomes a survival mechanism instead of a growth mechanism. So it applies to human traffickers. It applies to parents and children. It applies to everybody. And so if you can see these examples and see the obvious fear that is cycling through people, take that and try and apply it to your own life or the lives of the people around you, and understand that this same tactic is used by the world around you to control you. And you don't see it, one, because you're in the middle of it, and two, because it's a little bit more subtle. Watching somebody in a totally different environment, in a situation like a human trafficker, you can see things a lot clearer because it's more extreme and it's very foreign to you. But when it's your own life, it's so much harder to see it. But this is how society treats people. At the end of the day, 99% of people don't speed because they could get a ticket, not because they believe that speed limits are wise. 90% of people, and I'm making up these factors, these numbers. I don't have any research to back them up, but most people they follow basic traffic law and basic convenience law, local laws, because they don't want to get in trouble. And when life gets hard, people choose whether or not to steal based on whether or not they're more afraid of lacking what they're about to steal, or if they're more afraid of the consequences of stealing. Either way, it's fear. People choose, I've heard this in Christian communities, like, you're either too afraid to share the gospel or you're too afraid not to share the gospel. I'm sorry, both are fear. Both are wrong. Both are not, and wrong. I don't want to say wrong because then it makes you feel guilty, but rather it's not good for you. It's not healthy. It's not what God wants. I have not given you a spirit of fear. I've heard people say, well, we're supposed to have a healthy fear. You should have a healthy fear of getting hit by a car. No. you respect the fact that that car is bigger than you, and you're going to choose not to stand in front of it. That's not fear. It's not the same. And if you haven't experienced it, you have no idea what I'm talking about. I know, because I've been there, and I am currently fighting through fear on many different things, and I'm starting to see how it owns my life. And so anyway, that may be a deeper topic for another time, but you kept saying things about the way the world controls us, and it does so through fear. And fear manipulates your sense of responsibility, and it convinces you to give it over to someone else or something else. I work for this company because they pay my bills. You're giving the responsibility for you and your family's well-being to the company. And so taking back personal responsibility sounds like something that is a lot deeper than just doing what you're supposed to do.
One of the ways that I think you can test yourself, and I think as a culture on a grander scale, we can see this at play. But one of the ways you can test yourself is, okay, do I live in fear? And one of the big ways is, how comfortable are you stepping out of your normal existence? How comfortable are you doing something that's unpredictable? How comfortable are you doing something different? Because as soon as you step out and are in a unfamiliar, uncomfortable, challenging situation, who you become in that moment is completely predicated off of who you are as a person. And if who you are as a person is very small and controlled by fear, and everything you do is just to satiate that fear, then you've just basically created your life is a padded room that you've created to make sure nothing hurts you. And I think we see this because we see a lot of we'll call it antisocial individuals in the world right now. It's not because people aren't social. It's not because suddenly there's this uptick in people that just can't handle other people. It's because it presents a unpredictable circumstance. And that terrifies me as an individual, to be able to try and interact with somebody. I don't know what they're going to act. I don't know what they're going to say. I don't know I don't know anything about it. And that's just more than I can handle. So as a culture, we've kind of created fear-filled, anxiety addicted individuals who really have created a padded cell for themselves. That's what their life is a padded cell of, I'm just going to do exactly what I have to do so that I'm okay, and I'm too scared to step out of that. That's one way you can tell really quickly. I am absolutely controlled by fear. And like Damian said, that means that you have to continually hand over personal responsibility to something or someone else. And the hard part about that is, in a culture that's predicated off of industry standards and constantly being inundated with I want to say propaganda, but we'll just call it, advertisements and news and social media. You're emotionally and mentally being batted around from one, situation, one way of thinking and feeling to another, trying to figure out, like, well, how do I feel, or how am I supposed to feel, or what do I want, or what am I supposed to want? And you're going to be kicked around all day, every day. It's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. If you are not a solid individual who knows who you are and can step out into real life without being completely overrun by fear, I mean, you're just life is going to be rough. Life is going to be really rough for you, because you are susceptible to everything and everyone.
Yeah, our society is complete manipulation at this point. Like you said, the advertisements and the news and all that, it pushes fear. It makes you want to feel fear. And the reason it does that is because American society specifically, but I would wager other people's, the goal that it is set for the purpose of life is comfort. Comfort is another way of saying safety. And so I think I think there might be some arguments out there, but I think that really in modern American culture, the number one pursuit, the number one goal of every single individual through all what's the word I'm looking for? Financial tiers, through all power structures, all systems, is safety. Okay, when they enact a new law, the biggest reason is for safety. When they decided whether or not they were going to force people to have vaccines, it was for the safety of people. When they put up a speed limit, it's for your safety. Okay, when they restrict your freedoms, it's for your safety. How can I be safe? Everything must be safe. Okay, put your children in bubble wrap. Put rubber things on the corners of your tables. Don't let them touch anything. Safety. So, like, that's always the question. Everything's about being safe, because if I'm not safe and I'm not controlled, then I feel victimized and I don't know how to be anything. And so if the number one goal is safety, the number one tool to manipulate people would be fear. Because if I make you afraid that your safety is compromised, I can tell you what you must do to fix it and you will obey. And that's everything. That's the entire culture. And I don't think it's limited to America, but I have a lot of experience with American culture, so that's what I'm sticking with. But I think fear is the enemy of responsibility. It's the enemy of self. It's the enemy of self-actualization. It's completely defeating you and turning you into a slave to anything that can give you enough fear to cause action.
I think the other factor that Kathy even mentioned for why people struggle with self-responsibility is shame. And I think fear and shame are very, very closely linked. But it's interesting because I've been reading Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. And one of the first ones is treat yourself as someone that you are responsible for. And he talks about statistically speaking, the majority of people are more likely to make sure that they give their pets their medication when they're sick, as opposed to taking their own medication when they're sick. And he talks about the breakdown of people, how so many people are likely to even go to the doctor when they're sick. Even fewer people are likely to follow up with getting a prescription when they're given a prescription, and even fewer people are likely to take it. And he talks about shame. He talks about how there's this shame that people have, and they look at an animal, a helpless animal, and they're more likely to take care of the animal than themselves. And so overcoming that and really goes back to I don't think that there is an effective, and I'm willing to hear arguments on this. I'm not sure that there's an effective way to overcome fear and shame without having a solid identity in God. I just don't. I think that really you can come out of addiction, you can come out of a lot of things and not have God be a part of it, but you must be motivated by something else, and your motivation must be bigger than what you're currently dealing with. And so let's say I'm addicted to drugs and my fear of losing my kids is greater than my fear of quitting drugs. Okay. That's your motivator, but it's still fear. You might say, my fear of going to work is really great, but my fear of not being able to pay my bills is greater. So a lot of people overcome a fear with a greater fear. What do you fear most? Right? And again, that's where you become susceptible and easily victimized by the world around you, because they're all vying for whatever they want from you. They just got to decide, I'm just going to make you more afraid of me than everything else. But
right.
this shame that comes is with the realization that you are lacking. You are lacking something, that you are not perfect, that you are not living to the standard that you should be. Right. And it's just, I think it's this innate thing that every person has. And it's something that develops or is put there. In some cases, people experience shame because of abuse of various different kinds, but it's something that every human being deals with. And if you haven't dealt with it, I'm going to go so far as to say, if you've never dealt with shame, then you've never had to come to the realization of who you are and what you're lacking. So you've never met yourself if you don't deal with shame. You don't realize that there are things that you do and have done that are shameful. So I don't think that it's capable, that it's possible to overcome these things without God, because God's the only one that can say, I take your shame, I cover you, and I give you a new identity that is without shame.
Yeah. I mean, this is a really deep topic. It's hard because I think back to my childhood, and my parents were not perfect, but I by no means think that they were awful, terrible individuals either. Like, I feel like they were pretty standard. So, but what I remember being taught as a child is to consider the consequences. Consider when you're about to do something, consider the consequences, and also consider if it was right or wrong according to God. And these are these two things. And so I think that's a pretty general way of teaching your children. You know, why don't you touch the hot stove? Because it will burn you and that will hurt. You start there, and then everything from that point on is about the consequences. Why don't you drink alcohol and go to parties when you're 15? Well, because it's illegal and you could get in trouble or bad things could happen and so on and so forth. And I think the problem with that is that, as logical as that sounds, I still think that that is a fear-based lesson. I still think that at the end of the day, what you're teaching people is to follow what is more fearful. And so then you, as a parent, your job becomes to force them to be more afraid of the things you don't want them to do than they are of the things that you do want them to do. So you have to force them to be more afraid of the consequences of violating your rules than of not. So you have to be a very strict disciplinarian parent. You have to figure out what punishments work best against your kids and use that against them, so that when they are deciding, do I go to this party and drink alcohol with my friends, or do I listen to my parents? You have to convince them that being punished by your parents is going to be more severe than being ridiculed by your friends for not going to a party or missing out on fun or whatever it is. You have to convince them of that. And that's very challenging, which is why people struggle so much with the teenage years. Because at the end of the day, they start to lose respect for their parents. They start to lose that desire to please their parents and gain a desire to please others. And this applies to everything. And so your culture is completely in control of what you do. Because at some point, you see this in culture. Why abortion has become a big issue. Why transgender rights has become a thing that everybody's fighting over. And so on and so forth. You're transferring the fear of things to other things. So now, instead of being afraid of being called a sinner because I support trans people, I'm now afraid of not supporting trans people because that makes me a bigot. And so whatever society has decided is right is now going to use against you. And now you have fear and you have to conform to their way of thinking because you're more afraid. And so again, morality depends totally on whoever controls fear. And we're taught that as children. And so all of this leading around, my point that I wanted to make was there has to be something higher than that. If God is not teaching us through fear, if God's lesson is not consider the consequences before you act, then, because if that were the case, I would be doing something else, because there have been consequences for the things that I've done that have been painful. And I should change to what I'm doing because my consequences are not enjoyable. And you read the Bible, and people had lots of consequences for following God. And if that were the case, then they should be doing something different. And I've heard Christians accuse me and others of this many times. It's like God is telling you to stop doing what you're doing, and he's telling you by allowing these consequences to happen. Like, clearly God's not with you because things are hard. Like, that's not biblically accurate. That's not reality. So there has to be something higher. So the question is, what is higher? What is the reason to do the right thing? What is the reason to be responsible if it's not considering the consequences or the outcome? What is the reason?
So I would say that I think God does call us to look at the consequences. What he calls us to is to look at the consequences, and when we say the consequences are greater than what I can handle, then he looks at us and goes, then we have to be capable of handling these consequences. If following God requires my life, then I have to grow to be capable of offering that. If the consequences of following God is to become impoverished or to go through struggles, then I have to grow to become capable of that. And that does require a responsibility. It requires you sitting there and going, I want to do this. I am not yet capable of doing this, and I'm going to work on being capable of doing this. So I think that that's one of the places that it starts, because especially when you first start, when you follow God and you say, I'm going to follow you, I'm going to do these things. And I see so many people enthusiastic about following God and they fall apart. It's because he says, count the cost, right? Yeah. He says, count the cost. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think Christianity the gospel story has lost its potency in saying, yes, you want to follow God. Yes, it's the right path. Yes, he is a great foundation, and he's really the only one that can set you free. But it's going to cost. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. We don't add that part. This is challenging. And I want to do this, so I am going to work, and I am going to ask God to make me capable of doing this.
Yeah.
That is still taking responsibility. That is still being responsible for making a choice. And that is still counting the cost. But you deciding, I don't know if I can do this, but I want it anyway.
Yeah. It sounds to me like you're saying that the commitment level to God, to be so committed to him that you're willing to give your life, is not something that you can just choose and be done with, but rather something that you have to choose to want, and then let him walk you through being able to do it. I guess I've heard that a lot, and I said it a lot as a young youth group child. Like, I want to be that dedicated. I want to be willing to die or give my life to him. But like you said, most people really aren't. They like to say it, but they really aren't willing. And it's not because they're bad people. It's because you have to be made capable. You can't just hop on a bike when you're 5 years old and ride it. You have to practice. You have to work at it. And this is the same way. I've often heard people say, if you pray to God for patience, he's not going to give you patience. He's going to give you opportunities to practice being patient.
I was usually told, don't pray for patience. Then he'll make you patient.
Exactly.
With the negative.
That's exactly it. The fact is, God is not a fairy. He's not Santa Claus. He's not just granting wishes here. He is teaching us to be better. He is growing us. He's the whole point. If the point was just to be saved, then you would say your magic prayer, and then he would vaporize you into heaven, and it would be over. Right. The point is for you to be more, for you to grow. Mm-hmm. And that's what he does. And he doesn't, it's not magic. You have to go through it. You have to become more. So, yeah. I think that we've reached the end of our time here, and there's a lot to explore. I think that we covered a good portion of the first question of personal responsibility, and we dove in a little bit to what does it mean to take personal responsibility and how difficult it actually is to just brush your teeth and take care of yourself, and the importance that is placed on this. I think we've accurately established that responsibility and personal responsibility is essentially the first step and kind of the core of being able to be anything else, and that our society wholeheartedly opposes and rejects this idea. So it's a good start, and I think that what we're going to do, folks, is do another one of these, and we'll see if it evolves into a 3-part, but we're going to cut it off here. We've done about an hour and a half, and we're going to cut it off, and we'll do a part 2 where we explore external responsibilities and how to decide between what should be yours and what is not yours, and so on and so forth. So thank you all for joining us here on Spearcast today. Thank you to my two panel members, Bethany and Kathy, so much for being here. It's a blessing to work with you guys and hear your perspectives on things. You can find us on the web at the-spear.blogspot.com. You can find us on all the socials just by putting at the Spear or Spearcast. And don't forget to look up Kathy on upwardhouselearning.com, and don't forget to look up Bethany on Amazon or on Facebook at facebook.com/BHNovels. And we look forward to seeing you guys again.